the Popcorn Digest with Gareth and Andy. Popcorn Digest.
Hello, I'm Gareth.
And I'm Andy.
And welcome to the Popcorn Digest, a podcast series in which we digest the best and worst popcorn movies Hollywood has to offer. In our first episode, we're swinging through The Legend of Tarzan. Alexander Skarsgård is the king of the swingers in yet another adaptation of Edgar Rice Burroughs' source material, this time brought to life by regular Harry Potter director David Yates. But is The Legend of Tarzan a film worth shouting about? Listen on to find out.
We will never survive. I have done all I can to protect my family. Today, I buried my wife. Now I fear for my child.
So Andy, what did you think of David Yates' Tarzan? The Legend of Tarzan, I should say.
I don't want to say anything. Just leave me alone. I don't want to do anything with this. I'm just gonna go home and brood.
Well, that is Tarzan down to a T. This is definitely the emo adventures of Tarzan, really.
The Legend of Emo Tarzan.
I could see him going to like a My Chemical Romance gig straight after this film concluded.
Definitely. Oh, this film is, I think, to put it in a sentence, it's a confused, disjointed mess of a film.
It's schizophrenic.
Yes.
And that was something that I really didn't expect coming into the film. I mean, we knew that it hadn't got the greatest of reception because we're coming at this actually somewhat late for American audiences.
Yeah.
But it's only just actually been released over here.
Mm.
I knew that it, like say, it wasn't as well received as Warner Brothers might hope it would. But I wasn't really expecting it to be as disjointed as it was. I was still expecting it to be a somewhat straight Tarzan tale. I didn't think that they were going to do this whole postmodern twist of making it a sequel to a film that doesn't exist.
Yeah. It's disjointed in two ways because it's obvious that the edit has been ripped to shreds and certain scenes have been ripped out, so we suddenly jump from one place to another.
Yeah.
And the other thing, it's disjointed even in the writing process because they've burdened themselves with trying to tell an origin story and a sequel story at the same time. But even in doing that, they've picked some very odd choices in order to actually enact that tale. When we were watching it in the cinema, because we've literally just walked out of viewing the film, so it's very fresh in our minds.
Yeah.
We just kept saying to each other, why didn't they just do Tarzan as a film? Because clearly, from the first 10 minutes in, this approach just didn't work at all.
No, it strikes me as if the filmmakers and probably the studio as well were just being too clever for their own good.
Yeah.
Really, with the way in which they approach the Tarzan material. And when I see films like this that are sequels to other films that don't exist, I always feel like the people that are making it almost feel like there isn't enough material. There isn't enough to go on in the source material. It's almost like, oh, no, we have to go beyond this.
Yeah.
It's pompous in a way.
It's weird to think like they've made this film as a reaction to people not liking origin stories.
Yeah.
So they've tried to do it in one film and basically tell a sequel. But if you just did a film of Tarzan, I would not really term that as an origin story. That's just the story of Tarzan.
That is Tarzan.
It's not like if you're doing a Spider-Man film or a Batman film and you're doing his origin story. That's a completely different thing. And I don't think you should be categorizing this together with those kind of films because this is the story of Tarzan. And yes, it's an origin, but it's the whole story.
Yeah.
It's not as if it's like an ongoing thing and this is the very beginning.
Yeah.
So getting rid of that, that's the main problem. They don't get rid of it.
They try to have their cake
like,
and eat it too.
Yeah, it's a bit like an albatross for them, really, because at the end of the day, Tarzan's a well-known story, but probably to not enough of the mass populace, so you couldn't tell the story without acknowledging or even at least telling part of that story.
In a way, it's much like The Bourne Legacy in that it's constantly reminding you that there's a better film.
There's
just
a better
outside.
story
Yeah.
just out of shot. Well, it keeps flashing back to that better story.
It does,
basically.
yeah. And I guess as well, because of the way that it's structured and set up, is that we get issues then with certain characters and certain character motivations that we don't actually find out why they're doing what they're doing until so late in the story that it doesn't matter anymore. I think I have struggled to say his name, but Digimon Honsu.
Yeah.
his particular character is wasted in this film. He's a great actor, and he is completely wasted in this film because we don't actually find out what's driving him to do what he's doing until so late in the picture that it doesn't matter by that point, and it becomes a nothing by that point as well.
That particular story strand perfectly illustrates the problems they have in the storytelling and the edit, because he's presented right at the beginning as having some sort of beef with Tarzan. Then we find out from Samuel L. Jackson's character why, so therefore we're told it.
Yeah.
And then we're told it again in cinematic terms 15 minutes later.
Yeah.
So everything's the wrong way round.
It is, yeah.
Because we didn't need Samuel L. Jackson's character to tell us that. They could have just shown that
Shown it us.
much sooner, and we would have understood what was going on.
And it is clear that this film has been completely edited to shreds. It's been really over-edited.
Yeah.
Because you can always tell that from a film when they give you a book's worth of reading material before the film's even
I
started.
knew that was a bad sign.
Yeah. You always know that something's gone wrong here. And it does in this film. You get page after page of reading material, and then it jumps into the story.
I was expecting it to go on longer as well, because it got to a point where I was like, there's another caption, there's got to be another one now, because it's getting silly. Fortunately, they did stop, but it was just, it's not a good way to start your movie at all.
No, and the information as well that it presents, we are actually once more told it later on as the story more naturally develops. All that information comes back at us again, and it really strikes me as this is a test audience edition.
Yeah, it really strikes home that this is a film that the people involved have been very uncomfortable with, and they've not quite known what to do with it. And it's like anything, if you're nervous with it, you will fumble it.
Yeah.
If you're coming into it confident, you will execute it far much better. But if you really sort of, I don't know, you'll come up with something that is literally weak. It's weak because it doesn't tackle it head on. It sort of tips toes around the areas.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
And again, just this whole idea, the central idea of telling a sequel to a film that doesn't exist, it is bonkers. And I don't even know the reasoning behind it, because it seemed to have just caused them so many problems, because even in the advertising for this film, as you'll have seen in the trailer, it almost markets it as a straight telling of the Tarzan story.
Yeah.
But then it's not, because I knew that it wasn't, but you didn't know
I
that,
had
did you?
no idea, yeah. And because of the way that the marketing has presented the film, and because of the way the film actually is, almost strikes me as if this is something that they've realised late, that they've told the wrong story. So they've marketed a completely different film.
Yeah.
Just in terms of what story's being told. And we do get issues as well with this, because we get flashbacks from Tarzan to things and scenes in which he couldn't possibly have a perspective of.
Yeah, because you get the whole scene of Tarzan's parents being killed and his discovery from the gorillas. There's no way you can possibly remember that, because he's a little kid, little baby, and also he's not seeing any of these things. So it's a classic mistake of doing a flashback to something that the character has never seen.
And I even think that these flashbacks come in at the wrong moments in terms of the way that the film is set up, because you get Tarzan looking into the middle distance, and suddenly we flash back to his dad burying his wife and whatnot. All the while, these scenes are narrated by his father, who's clearly written in a diary. And then a couple of scenes later, we get Tarzan reading his father's diary. And I thought, oh, well, this is surely the point in which to throw this flashback in. Because it doesn't make sense for the flashback to be where it is without having this diary framing it.
Yeah, it tells me that this is not how it was in the script. That it was actually in a completely different place. I would even go as far to say that these scenes were meant to start the film and you had a full 15-minute long section of the opening of Tarzan, and they've sort of bolted it and tried to just even out the film by having it spread throughout, but that causes other problems.
And there are good ideas as well in what is presented. One of the things that they actually play on very early on in the film, which actually doesn't come to play off later, but it's that Tarzan himself as an individual, his physiology has changed. So his hands are different. His hands move in different ways than normal humans would, because it's almost like he has evolved to become more gorilla-like.
Yeah, his bone structure's changed, doesn't it?
Yeah, completely. And I thought that's a great idea. And yet, it would have been much better to see Tarzan himself develop in that way over the years. If it was a much more straighter origin story, we would have seen that happen. Like, as a youngster, he wouldn't have been able to swing like gorillas did, to move like gorillas, had a hard time adapting in that way. But then we see him gradually change. We see him physically change to become less human and more gorilla-like. I want to see that film.
And the thing that struck me, that seemed the obvious thing to do if you're put in this position, you could have done the Tarzan origin story and this new story, but you could have combined them in a more organic way. You could have told the start of Tarzan and then have all this plot strand come in when we meet Jane and her father, and you could have had that all wrapped into one, and you could have dealt with those issues on slavery and everything like that.
Yeah.
And it would have been just a much more organic way of doing it, because the main problem with this film is that it's so bogged down with these flashbacks. I would say that they encompass almost 40% of the running time.
Yeah.
And it's like they're not comfortable with having the two sitting next to each other. So you get all these long scenes of characters staring into the distance and remembering these things that they haven't seen.
Yeah.
Because they have to tell the story.
And the characters seem a lot more fun in the flashbacks.
Yes.
Compared to the way that they are. Because this is a really downbeat film. It's a downbeat portrayal of the Tarzan mythos. Because even when we're introduced to Tarzan, one of the first things I lent over to you and actually said was he's a mopey bugger, isn't he? Because he's very moany, he's joyless.
I think he smiles once in the whole film.
Yeah, I'm not surprised actually. And straight off the bat, I was thinking, oh, maybe it's going to get fun. You know, maybe something's going to happen. And then we find out Jane as well isn't even a happy individual. She's had a miscarriage or a baby's died. And I was like, Jesus Christ, just give me a lift here, will you? Just make this more fun. And it's just kept on like knocking me further and further down.
Yeah.
It was just nothing fun about it. And every now and again, it gives you a glimpse of these flashbacks. And it was like, oh, be more like that.
Yeah. It's far too downbeat for its own good, and kudos to them for making a downbeat Tarzan film. I wouldn't think it's possible to make a downbeat Tarzan film, and it's just one of those stories that begs to be done in that kind of 1930s serial way. It needed a bit of Indiana Jones in there, not in terms of what they're doing, but just in terms of the tone.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a film that I'm always surprised that Steven Spielberg never tackled, because it's one of those kind of films that seem tailor-made for him.
It does.
Or someone like that, but they've gone about it in such a... It's like, it is literally someone who's watched a Christopher Nolan film and went, oh, I can do that.
Yeah.
What can I make a Christopher Nolan film out of? Because we were talking literally about, this is yet another film that tries to emulate and fails spectacularly, because it doesn't really understand what made that film good. Because people think, oh, The Dark Knight's good because it's brooding. And that is not the case.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of humour in The Dark Knight.
It is.
If you noticed.
Yeah. The thing is as well, they always go out of their way to establish Bruce Wayne as someone who has levity about him, even if it's like a dark humour.
Yeah.
He still has his moments, especially with Alfred.
Yeah.
Which there is no humour in Tarzan in this film, really.
No, there's a little bit, but it sits very uneasily with everything else that's going on.
It's fleeting. And I'd say even as well, just in terms of the way that they portray all of the ape characters in this film, they're so peripheral because of the structure of the film. We never really get to know any of the ape characters as characters. We just get to know them as just a tribe of apes. I'd say that's actually kind of merciful in a way, because a lot of apes and monkeys die in this film horrifically. There's a lot of monkey death. It's Monkey Death the movie, I called it.
It's a strange thing to chuck out what is probably the central core of your Tarzan story, which is Tarzan's relationship with the gorillas.
Yeah.
And they pretty much cut that whole part of it out. It's dealt with very tepidly.
Yeah.
And in fact, like, they deal with the whole Tarzan thing very tepidly anyway, because I say Tarzan himself only is Tarzan for probably around about 20 minutes of the whole film. And the rest of the time he's kind of, I don't want to be Tarzan, for reasons. We never actually find out why he doesn't want to be Tarzan.
Yeah, and why he doesn't want to return to this world, because it seems to be the place that he's most at home at.
Yeah.
Because there is one image that I really liked in the film, and it's the first image that we do get of Tarzan, and he has that ape-like hand, but it's in a glove. I like the idea of no matter how you dress up this individual, he's always going to be wild at heart. I like that image. I thought it was a clever way to show Tarzan. But also, I was thinking, is there a way in which a fun movie can be made that deals with colonialization and slavery? And while I was watching the film, that kept coming up. I kept asking myself, well, if you are going to make a Tarzan film and incorporate these elements and make it about slavery, could it still be fun? And then I thought, of course, Samuel Jackson was in one of those films. He was in Django Unchained, which is one of the funnest films about such an horrific subject. I mean, that is a film that has its hideous and horrific moments as well. But I do think you can actually incorporate these elements and still make a fun film with a strong message.
Yeah, I was just thinking, what if Tarantino made a Tarzan film? It'd be called Tarzan Unbraided.
And it would still have Samuel L. Jackson in it. So, that gives us a good chance to move on to the cast as well. We've got to say straight off the bat, I think Samuel L. Jackson was actually the most valuable person in this film. he provided the film with its most with its levity,
Fun moments,
fun
yeah.
moments. He seemed like the only character that was actually enjoying himself as well.
Although, unfortunately, his character's completely superfluous to the plot.
Yeah.
He's literally Mr. Sidekick. But yeah, he's definitely one of the most watchable things in the film and brings it some levity.
What did you think of Alexander Skarsgård in the lead role?
I thought he looked the part. He'd obviously done a lot of work, a lot of working out and a lot of training to get him to look like Tarzan.
Yeah.
And I thought when he was actually being Tarzan, he was pretty great. But he's just not served by the material. He's not Tarzan for long enough. And the rest of the time, he's just playing this emo chap that happens to have been Tarzan once upon a time and doesn't want to return to that world for
reasons unknown.
When he's actually being Tarzan, it's great. And it's really frustrating that he's literally only Tarzan for about 20-25 minutes of the whole film. Yeah, and I say we see him smile once, and I don't understand why that is the case. He's just brooding for reasons. Really.
Yeah.
And there's no reason for him to be like that, which is a shame because I think, when he does play Tarzan, he does play Tarzan well, but he's just not given the opportunity to play Tarzan for long enough to really make an impression. Yeah,
he handles the physical side of the character with style, I would say, but anytime that he actually opens his mouth, which is not very often in the film as well, I can't think of a memorable thing that he said in the film. And actually, beyond the action, I can't remember a memorable thing that he actually did.
No.
There was one solid action set piece. So there's two solid action set pieces. There's the final one, but also there's one on a train at the midway point in the film as well, which is when the film's at its most Indiana Jones-esque.
Yeah.
And that was the moment where I thought, I like this character. Because I don't think the problem is Alexander Skarsgård. I think he's fine. I think it's the way the character's written and the way he's being directed.
I mean, the whole tone of the film needed to be like that, and you only get it in fits and starts.
Yeah.
Because in the start of the film, it very much reminded me of John Carter in the fact that it's so busy procrastinating about setting things up and dealing with certain things that it forgets to actually start the story.
Yes, yeah.
This happened for me as well, because I was expecting, after you get the whole sequence with the Prime Minister and Samuel L. Jackson introducing himself, that when he agrees to actually go on the trip, you would jump straight to Africa then and cut all the bullshit. But we get a whole other 10 minutes before they even get there of other stuff that we could probably deal with when we're there, but it's just a lot of talking in dark, shadowy places.
Yeah, it is.
And it's just like...
And I get
it
what
really
they're
robs the film
say.
of any pace, because from that point, we're going to get into the adventure. Nope. More stuff.
No, we've still got
more
another
depressing.
10 minutes of preamble. Of
We've got more
misery.
We need some more brooding.
We need to establish the baby death.
Yeah, because the pace of this film's all off. The film is an hour and 50 minutes long. I mean, probably about an hour and 40 odd actual film time, but it feels so much longer.
I thought it was over 2 hours.
Very slow.
Yeah.
It's only really in the last 20 minutes that it really picks up pace. And even then, you have an awkward cut from one location to another. Like the end of the second act and the third act, there's something missing in the middle. There's a couple of weird jump cuts like that. Even the jump cut from actually when they go from England to Africa is a strange cut.
Yeah, it is.
I think almost because it happens at the wrong time. Because they've left it so long, when you actually go to Africa, it's almost like too sudden again because they've slowed the pace down so much.
I would have even taken like an Atlas montage where you see the dotted line move across the Atlas.
I think the perfect analogy for the edit of this film, the pace of this film, it's like a fast car stuck behind a slow car. So you get the slow car going in front, and then the fast car speeds up and then has to stop.
Yeah.
Because it has to let the slow car go through. And then it speeds up again and it has to stop. It's very much like that. There's no natural rhythm. You can really tell that this is a film that's almost been recreated and put back together in the edit, but nothing has been shot for that particular edit, so it doesn't work as a whole.
And talking about the way that the film has been shot, one of the things that struck me while I was watching it is that I would say a good 60 to 70% of the film is simply close-ups. Just ridiculously ramped up close-ups. I was actually getting claustrophobic while I was watching it, considering this massive jungle space that they're in.
It's because they filmed it in a car park, that's why. They filmed it at the baths.
Yeah, but one of the other things as well that leads me to believe that this film has been over-edited is that we have actors like Ben Chaplin.
Yeah.
Who turns up and maybe he says 2 lines and dies.
Yeah.
Ben Chaplin, not exactly an A-lister, but he's not
No.
exactly a Z-lister either.
No.
He's still one of those kind of supporting actors that you're happy to have. Whereas in this, he's a glorified extra.
And then you get other things where, like, Jane and her friend escape and then nothing becomes of that and he just suddenly appears at the end on the train. And
Yeah, they make a big deal of this actual escape where Jane escapes to tell this guy to go and assemble the tribes so they can take on Christoph Waltz and the bad guys. But that doesn't add up to anything. The tribes assemble and just cheer on a ridge somewhere.
Yeah.
And actually, Jane's escape leads to the death of tens of happy monkeys and gorillas. Which, again, hammers home that this isn't a family film.
Yeah.
This is Monkey Death, the movie.
I mean, there's other things as well that, like, she escapes and the other guy goes, but the rest of the party that's been on the boat, they suddenly appear very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Like, as if there's another scene there in the middle, which allows the guys to get off the boat and onto land, because they're almost like they fly there.
Yeah.
Some of the staging in this film is really weird.
It is.
It's just not been well thought out, I
No.
don't think. It's just because the main problem with your story at the end of the day, it's just another one of those stories where someone's been kidnapped and people follow after them.
Yeah.
And then they catch up with them at some point, and then there's a ruckus at the end, and that's about it.
Yeah, and they try and fail to give Jane any kind of
Yeah.
agency as well. They try to make her scrappy, but actually, at the end of the day, she is just the damsel in distress.
It's a very by the numbers story, which is why I think when you go back to the flashbacks, it's like, oh, that's the film I want to see.
Yeah.
It's much more playful.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's much more interesting because it's the original story, which is why Tarzan is still around to this day, because it's a good story. And it's like, you've got a good story like that. No one's made a proper version of Tarzan for years. And obviously you can discount the Disney one because it's an animation.
Yeah.
It's a good film in its own right, but it's animation. But no one's made a good live action version of Tarzan for many, many years.
Yeah.
And this will be the perfect opportunity to do that story. And yet they shy away from it for reasons.
So, Andy,
Yes.
I have to ask, would you recommend Tarzan to our audience?
Nope, I would watch the Disney version. If you're
Yeah.
going to watch a modern day version, watch the Disney one.
I absolutely agree with you. I think this was over-edited, overworked, and I'm over it. Okay, and thank you for listening to Popcorn Digest. We'll be back soon with more episodes. In the meantime, you can also catch us on Best Forgotten Movies. Thanks for listening.
There's 1,000 men down there, 20,000 more on the way. We don't stand a chance.
A normal man can do the impossible to save the woman he loves. My husband is no normal man.